Hi, and welcome to today's LinkedIn Live. We're going to be discussing generative AI and cutting through the hype behind generative AI for manufacturing. Quick look at our agenda. So we'll start with talking about hype, an overview of the history of AI. So 4 principles that we have here at Tulip when it comes to AI more broadly, but also generative AI specifically. We'll do a demo on how to unlock value today, and we'll take questions and do a live Q&A at the end. I'll be your moderator, but I'm here with 2 panelists. I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hey everyone, I'm Mason. I lead the engineering team here at Tulip. It's responsible for building the hardware and software that powers our product.
And I'm Roy. I'm leading the AI practice at Tulip from go-to-market and strategy. And I will cover some technical aspects of generative AI and how we think about it here at Tulip.
And I lead marketing here, and I'll be managing the chat. So make sure to submit your questions, and I'll make sure that they come up during our live Q&A session. Pass it over to Mason.
All right. So as probably all of you have seen, there's been a bunch of information over the past 6 to 9 months about generative AI. For a bit there, it felt like you couldn't open a newspaper without seeing a new article on the promise or danger of the recent advances in AI. You even had Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, testifying before Congress about related issues around it. It's been a pretty crazy time, and it's pretty obvious that the world is changing, right? The way that we think and talk about this technology and this ability is fundamentally different from the conversations we were having even a year ago. Next slide here. We've also seen this in startups and in venture capital. There's been a huge explosion of new companies and money pouring into the space, people trying everything and anything to see if they can take advantage of what's effectively felt like a gold rush recently. Next. However, we also want to sort of temper expectations. There's also a very clear hype cycle going on. Everybody is over the moon about all of the potential and possibilities and things that could be possible. And we have to realize that a lot of these are still 2-3 years away from full realization. Some of the promises or threads you might see on Twitter about the crazy new thing that ChatGPT can do are still many, many years away from full productization and full launch and the full impact that they'll carry. But I think we all agree on the long-term impact that a lot of these tools will have on the way we do our work.
So on that, Roy, why don't you back us up a little bit and talk about how AI has evolved over time?
So I want to start with a quick distinguish between AI and generative AI, just for our discussion. So generative AI is a sub-vertical of AI in general. And while in the last 10 years, we saw AI across industries doing a lot of things with many applications and use cases, generative AI, when it comes to industry value, is quite new. So AI will be a set of algorithms and techniques that help the world to get value from data. You get some kind of data as input to these models and get some kind of output from these models. The basic idea of how to split between classic AI and the most new generative AI is to think about the output. Things like classifying data will be classical AI because you analyze the data. Generative AI will generate a new thing that was never present before, a new text, a new image, a new song, a new video. So this generation of something in maybe a human-like way is what I will classify as generative AI. So that's a brief idea. And the next concept that I want to cover is what happened in the last 70 years in generative AI. And this is a quick timeline of key milestone. Obviously, there are many others when it comes to generative AI. And it's important to note that it started somewhere in the 50s with establishment, and people started to think about this idea of machine that is going to generate something new. In the 60s, maybe the most notable algorithm was ELIZA, that it was probably the first time a human thought about a machine generating something in a human-like manner. Then in the early 80s, we started to see more sophisticated development when data became more available, statistical models and statistical ideas became more accessible. People moved this practice from more theoretical field into more practical ideas, hidden market models, for example. The term natural language processing was first used, most known as NLP. So before 6 months ago, everybody was using the term NLP to describe generative AI, but now we're using generative AI. So that was interesting to note. But basically, natural language processing is what we're seeing here. In the beginning of the 2000s, the deep learning era was introduced, which is a subtype of AI technique that is using neural networks or deep neural networks in order to model the world and model the data. And I think what happened in the last 5 years is absolutely explosion in algorithms, and the concept of large language models was introduced 2018 with GPT-1, which is this foundation model that takes huge amount of data and modeling them into one model that can then be used for different applications. We see a line of breakthroughs and advancement in the last 2-3 years, where the most noticeable event was 6 months ago, November 2022, where ChatGPT as an application on top GPT was introduced. And I think now we're in the application era, and the application go wild. In the next slide, you can see basically what I see as what's happening now. And data is a promise in the last 10 years. Everybody's talking about data and AI, but I think we're reaching a golden age of using these techniques. Now, a few statistics that I collected from the web to take this hype and bring it into reality. You can see, for example, in this graph in the middle, the amount of publications that are published around AI and machine learning, which is absolutely exploding in the last 2 years. The amount of API calls on the top left, right, more than 1,300% growth in API calls to these foundation models. We see market size that is keep growing into in crazy numbers of trillions of dollars of value from AI. The number of startups was growing 14 times in the last 20 years. We still don't see that in manufacturing, where more than 70% of companies haven't adopted AI yet. But we definitely see more and more interest in more traditional areas such as life science and pharma. And last, I want to note the amount of data that is being used here to train these models. So if you think about a foundation model such as GPT-3, we're talking about 45 terabyte of data. Now that might sound a low number, but if you think about text that is quite condensed, it's not images, not video, that's astronomical amount of data. I won't go into all the details in this slide, but it's important to note that there is a very heavy and complex technology behind these foundation models. Transformers is probably the most interesting technology to note. As you can see on the left side in this figure, it's a set of complexities and items and technologies around deep learning and neural networks that are combined together. Attention techniques is a foundation aspect here. In the right side, you can see the training process of ChatGPT, which has many components, but one very important one is that there is a lot of supervised data that was collected to train this model. When I say supervised data, I mean that a human was involved in labeling the data and creating these technologies. So maybe the last topic that I want to cover in terms of like the background technologies about that, is the foundation model. And the foundation model, the large language model, is using astronomical amount of data for training from different types. It could be text, could be images, video, speech, etc. We have seen a lot of things in the last few months. But what happened in the last few months is that these foundation models start to propagate into real life applications. And these applications, ChatGPT is one of them, are actual way to see value from that. And that's what we want to talk about today, value from these technologies.
So I guess grounding it a little further, Mason, why don't you share how you're thinking about generative AI?
For sure. So AI in general is not new to Tulip. We've been building products that embed and take advantage of AI since our earliest days back in 2014, 2015. A lot of our customers are using AI-powered machine and computer vision in order to help detect parts on the shop floor or do optical character recognition, detect defects, things like that. And you can read about all of our computer vision capabilities online today. However, if you go to the next slide here, over the past several months, as everything's been changing so rapidly in the generative AI landscape, we've been taking advantage of our platform-based architecture to move along quickly. And we've already released several new connectors and applications in our library that deeply integrate different AI tools and allow you to just generically connect to OpenAI, or a couple pre-built applications that can take advantage of some of these fundamentals and allow you to do some classification or labeling or translation within the context of a library app. So you can go on our library today and download these and get started immediately if that's interesting. Looking more broadly, we're now also taking this back into R&D and figuring out how do we build these, take advantage of these generative AI capabilities directly within the product itself, not just on top of the platform side of it. And at a high level, there are three main areas that we think about. How can we use generative AI tools to simplify development? So think about this as your classic generative case. How can you use one of these models to help you build an app or build an analysis or build a connector to a third-party system and make it easier and faster to build complex things within Tulip? Number two is around data analysis. How can we help you explore your data at a more semantic level? Instead of having to go and build a strict Tulip analysis that will tell you X, Y, Z, can we use something like ChatGPT to allow you to ask questions of your data and be able to ask things like, what was the defect count yesterday? Or which of my stations produced the most parts? Down the line, this can also potentially go into prompting those and taking, automatically doing that analysis and giving you the results at the end. Now, finally, there's the operator side, the real shop floor sort of last mile interface that a lot of our customers use. For this, we're seeing a lot of interest around helping to understand and ask meaningful questions of documents and PDFs. That might be a manual for a machine or a catalog of defects that the line operator could start to semantically query and ask and get interesting text-based responses from that collection of data. So you can go.
Thank you. I think that's a good tee up for the next section. Like, there's one side is talking about principles, but another is showing what this could actually look like on shop floor and what the experience of using and incorporating generative AI is.
Hey there, I'm in the Tulip Experience Center and wanted to walk through a couple demos of what we've been doing with AI lately. The Tulip Experience Center is where we bring customers and prospects in to see all sorts of different ways Tulip can be applied in action in different industries, different use cases, all sorts of different things. I have two screens here up with me. This is the admin, the app editor side of things for Tulip, and this is the player running a live app. This first use case I want to show you is what we call the AI messenger. I have a box up here where I can input a defect. Let me go ahead and say case is scratched. Then I can hit submit. And what this is going to do is go and put this into a defects table, categorizing the type of defects based semantically off the content that I just inputted. So based on what I just said, it categorized that as defect. which is correct. It could also do and on or message or other things like that, and try to give good contextual information based on a free text input from an operator on the line. The next demo I want to show off is an integration between chat-based models like GPT and Tulip's knowledge base and internal data. So I can go here on this app. This is a motor assembly app. And on the bottom right, I have this little chat icon. If I press that, it's going to open up a little prompt-based interface here. And it says, hello, how can I help? I'm going to go ask it, does Tulip support OpenAI? It's going to come back and tell me, yes, Tulip's architecture and connector framework allows for support here. There's a library app that uses ChatGPT that can then be used in Tulip applications. So we've trained this model based on all of our public content, our library, our marketplace, all the support articles, and it's able to respond and answer questions based on that knowledge base. Now, let's double click and actually look at how these were built. So up here I have the Messenger app that I showed off earlier. I'm going to go here and click on the submit message button and look at the logic backing that. Now, what this is actually doing is passing through to our OpenAI connector that support article just referenced. We've used our same platform architecture to very rapidly add support for OpenAI and ChatGPT. Built it and shipped it within a day to our library, and now anyone can go and download that and use that connector to bring the power of ChatGPT into their own applications. We've taken all of these use cases that we've seen our customers start to explore with the OpenAI connector and begun to pave the cow paths to build them into the product. And I want to give you a sneak preview today of a new AI triggers action that's launching in closed beta immediately and into general availability later this fall. Right here I have a demo app that's going to show off the 3 new AI actions that we've built. The first of them is translate. This is pretty simple. What you see is what you get, right? Translate a given text into a destination language. Imagine being able to normalize all of your operator inputs in whatever language they know best into your preferred destination language. So here, for example, you might have an issue description field where they might write in their native language what's going wrong with an order that they're working on. We can then translate that into English or German or Spanish or Japanese or any of the other 27 languages that Tulip supports and allow you to save that. Now, number 2 is document querying. Now, we want to enable all users to be able to pull data from their different PDF resources and then answer semantic questions about it. Imagine being able to ask a machine manual, what's wrong with my machine? What does error code XYZ mean? Or what do I do when it runs out of oil? And synthesize all of the responses and insights from that maybe 2,000-page PDF and give you an interesting semantic answer. Now, finally, the last one is around extracting information from PDFs and images. Let's say you have a work order or traveler on the shop floor. It might have some fields like invoice or destination or quantity. The new AI trigger will allow you to ask questions of that PDF and extract that very specific information out. Say, what was the invoice address or what is the quantity, and get that result back from the PDF. As I mentioned, these triggers are going into a closed beta today. Feel free to reach out to me if you would like to join that program. Then we expect general availability later this fall. So keep an eye out for all of these cool new exciting AI-powered features that are coming to Tulip in the coming months. We've pretty rapidly taken a lot of these features from first proof of concept through connector functions and built them and shipped them into a real part of the product. With that, I want to hand it back to the Q&A, and hope to see you all there.
Hi, welcome back. So I think one of the questions for us to go ahead and start off with is what is the role of people in AI? I think a lot of the concern or fear about the use of AI, specifically generative AI, is the ways that it's going to impact the way that we work, but also opportunities for work in the labor market.
I think from really Tulip's day zero, we've always been human-centric. Our goal has never been to replace the people in factories. It's been to empower them and to enable them to do their jobs more effectively. And I see a lot of these AI tools as the next step in that, right? It's still based on human input and output, but just allowing them to learn faster or build faster than they would have been able to before.
Yeah, it's actually this combination of human-centric and generative AI, and actually even no-code that create these three components that coming together and actually empowering people in a cool way.
Yeah.
Think about a very simple messaging app that you showed in the demo that is now can automate small processes and make the user interaction much efficient, much faster, much simpler. So I think this human in the loop is really a key to see value now. If you will try to take these technologies and build complete, like without human in the loop applications, I think it's a good recipe for not to achieve what you want.
Yeah, totally. I would say that at this point in time in a lot of manufacturing, the people involved in the day-to-day are there because there's the hardest part of what that company does or what that process is, right? And generative AI is not going to change that. It's not going to replace that. It just empowers them and gives them even more superpowers over what they could already do.
Yeah, completely. And one of the terms that I didn't mention before, but I think we can mention now is hallucination. So because the way these models works, they really bias towards predicting what is the most common next word or the next sentence. It's basically auto-completion more than anything else. And because of that, there is a case of hallucinating or inventing new data. Yeah. And we talked about that as a defense mechanism, how to deal with that.
Totally. I mean, I'm thinking of the case here that was on the front page of the papers a couple of weeks ago of the lawyer who generated their brief with ChatGPT, and it made up entire cases that they referenced and didn't realize before they submitted their closing statement. When we think about it, we're trying to very concretely anchor it in specific pieces of data. So how can we contextualize the model with, here are 5 references that you can pass in, and so that it can reference back to those 5 and you can fact check the result based on that input. But then also, I think and this is to your point, it goes back to human in the loop, right? That you're not turning off the person's brain, you're pointing them in the right direction and helping them identify or surface things that would have been hard for them to find before, not telling them, here's your answer, just consume this piece of that information.
Yeah. I think the point about hallucinations also highlights like risk. So when thinking about using this type of technology or evaluating vendors, like what are some risks or things to keep in mind, like questions to ask of folks that you would work with to apply this type of technology in your manufacturing facility?
That's a great question. I think at least when we are trying to develop this next phase of generative AI, we have some guidelines of how to deal with hallucination as one. Make sure that there is a human in the loop for second. We're a bit biased toward structural data instead of just free text. And when we can use structural data, it's make the applications much stronger. Give you an example. We think about maintenance cases. So I can ask 50,000 pages, what is the best way to fix a problem? And I will probably get an amazing solution from ChatGPT, like of mechanisms. But if I have a list of 1,000 classical maintenance calls that we have been seen in the past, and I'm using that as an additional data, I'm much more likely to get what I want.
I think the other 2 things I think about are data sovereignty and making sure you're not using any models where the vendor is going to take your input as part of their next training set. You don't want to have your sensitive data end up in somebody else's model. And 2, when we as a company think about it, how do we make sure we segregate and segment different customers' data so there is no leakage or overlap between queries and things that different customers are asking?
All good points. We have a new question from the audience. Do you see an opportunity to apply applications of generative AI to more traditional ERP and MES systems? How do you think this could further impact frontline workers and citizen development?
I think one thing that, first of all, great question, and I think that the answer is definitely yes. And I think one of the early application that we thought about is how to deal with the amount of documents that are already there in production.
And just data in general, human or machine produced.
Yeah, for sure. So, data is the new oil, etc. Behind it, there is a screen here that shows the amount of data that we are tracking at Tulip every second, and how we use that data in applications, right? That's the basic questions that we want to ask. And traditional customers, traditional areas use a lot of data and procedures and documents. How we can take this data and bring them into more digital way.
Yeah.
And to use generative AI to shortcut that process.
Yeah, I think that the user persona I have in mind needs to be somebody who's making a decision and trying to understand data or manual or text in order to figure out their next step. And so this might be a maintenance worker who needs to understand a 2,000-page PDF of a machine manual in order to know what to do with an error code. Or it might be somebody who's repairing defects on a line and needs to scan through a whole library of past recorded defects in order to understand what they should do with this part in front of them.
And the citizen developer bit is also very interesting. So we think about three personas when we think about generative AI. Probably the manager that consumes data in one more holistic way, the operator that actually use applications to make his life more efficient, but also the engineer that is responsible to build more sophisticated solutions and maybe build them faster. I think the biggest promise probably of generative AI now, if I think about it, and many shared my thoughts, is around coding and how to write code faster and quicker. But if you think about it, no code is already a way to write code faster and quicker. And it will be super interesting to see this combination.
There's one other use case here I want to double click on as well, with the transformation of data, of human inputted data, right? So let's say you have a quality inspection and somebody is writing out a defect report of something that was found. You could take something like ChatGPT and use it to classify that large free-form semantic text into one of 10 different labels that describe your types of defects. And it wouldn't matter if that input is in English or Spanish or German or whatever language, you would still be able to classify it into your end results. And so that's not a big, huge, flashy, we'll build an app for you based on a paragraph, but it's actually a really concrete, tangible value that we can provide through these foundational models.
It's worth mentioning also that we have done a lot of work around analytics already, how to use the data that is already stored and analyze that easier with no code. I think it will be interesting to see generative AI as a booster to that process. Absolutely. As your co-pilot or AI assistant that help you to crunch the data easier.
And in the end, I think that actually loops back to the citizen developer generative side, because you might start exploring a path of data and then, okay, let's go make an analysis on this and let's add an alert on top of that. And then how does that feed back into the application where this data was generated? It all sort of becomes this feedback loop throughout the product.
One of the underlying concepts, I think, of what you were just talking about with citizen development versus like applications versus the platform is platform versus library, which you talked about earlier. Basically, can you differentiate like what are AI capabilities that like live in Tulip and what are AI capabilities that can be extended or added to Tulip by individuals and companies?
Absolutely, that's a great question. We approach a lot of our product development with a platform-first mentality. We recognize that no one company can build everything in this space, that you only can be successful by enabling extensions and extension points in the product and ways for others to build on top of it. And so we dug through that internally, right? When we started looking at these new models, we actually approached it from the platform side first and said, what can we build on top of the same platform primitives that we've already provided in the product? And then we went and looked at what were the use cases that came up through those primitives. How did people use this app? How did people use this connector we provided? And now we can go and take some of those directions and make them more first party and easier to use, more powerful, directly integrated into the product itself, and enable us to both move quickly and get something out there soon and start seeing the use cases, and then take that learning and bake it into our product development cycle.
it's probably worth mentioning that it's not something new to generative AI.
No.
The philosophy here was always to be an open platform and bring the best of the best to the customers. It could be tech vendors, it could be partners, it could be a big corporate that have amazing technologies that can integrate it to it.
Yeah, and in a lot of these cases, the same interfaces that we're building on internally match the external interface as well, right? That we're exposing the same tools that our software engineering team has to our customers as well.
And thinking about other applications, I know you demoed a couple. Where do you think there are opportunities to get value and like practically apply AI in either the present or near term?
The very near term are a lot of the things in the demo, right? How can we transform and classify incoming data that's free-form text-based from the shop floor? And how can we allow people to then explore large amounts of data that they might have, whether that's in a PDF or a Tulip table or wherever that data might come from. Further down the line, I'm really excited about digging more into the data exploration side and being able to start to answer more concrete queries through this sort of thing. So you could start to say, give me a graph of my defect rate over the past 7 days, or tell me how many parts I produced today, and interpret that semantic query into a more structured output.
I think that the important thing to note about applications is that there are things that are ready to use now. Things like the messenger and chat with documents and connectors and things that are mature now and can actually bring value into the shop floor. While you mentioned at the beginning that there is a hype, we're really thinking about what would be the next thing and how we can ingest these technologies into the next level of applications.
And speaking about the hype, for example, generating apps is an obvious thing that we would love to do at some point. And it's really hard, right? Generating an app and getting precise enough with your text description of an app such that the thing that's outputted is actually valuable and useful. Just writing that description is a really hard problem, nevertheless transforming that into an app.
So you just to make sure everybody understands, generating an app will be, I want an app that will do work instruction for my environment. I have this step and this step, and with a snap of the finger, you have a ready app. That's a complex problem.
Absolutely.
Thinking about the complex problems to solve in the future, what are your future predictions of how AI will impact industry?
I think that AI is already impacting industry. That's important. And in the last 10 years, we saw computer vision, for example, moving from something that is very expensive, very hard to achieve. You need data scientists and you need lots of expertise to really bring a solution to production. Today, a citizen developer, process engineer can go and build a quality inspection solution that will work quite well without any data scientists in the loop. I think we will see the same trend in generative AI, where people go and build generative applications such as text to app, such as text data to graph, and these transformation applications that generating new ideas and new concepts within few years, and citizen developer will be a stronger force to use generative AI.
I agree. I think it really helps lower the barrier of entry to a lot of the citizen development, makes it faster, easier to get started and moving in that space.
Excellent. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. We'll be covering generative AI more from Tulip, both in what we're releasing in the product and also how we think about it evolving in industry. One great opportunity to see that live will be at Operations Calling, Tulip's annual conference here in Somerville, Massachusetts on September 12th. So be sure to look